Finally, we have Karin Tidgewell, who is graduating this semester, which I have ambivalent feelings about. I'm so excited she's graduating, and I'm so sad that we won't see her as often. She is graduating with her Doctor of Public Policy. Yep, now we can clap. Now that I've shared that we'll miss her so much. Throughout her time at UNLV, Karin has been highly involved with the graduate college programs as a participant, as well as a researcher, mentor, and one of our Grad Rebel ambassadors. Her presentation today is entitled Rethinking Student Mobility, Educational Policy Development Recommendations Based on How Highly Mobile Students Move. Okay, please join me in welcoming Karin to the stage.
So I love patterns. I mean, I really love patterns. And as anybody who has ever seen my office can attest, I love patterns like this. And I love patterns like this. And I love patterns like this. And I really think the reason that I love patterns so much is they help me organize information and see relationships among things that I think I might otherwise miss. And it was my relationship with this particular pattern as a military spouse that led to my doctoral work here at UNLV. I've been looking at ways to reduce the negative impacts of frequently changing schools on our military kids' education, particularly at the elementary school level. Long before I had my own kids, I would see this same pattern among our military families, where they would move and their kids would change schools. And in addition to these really profound social and emotional challenges that these kids would experience, having to say goodbye to friends and make new friends and learn new rules in schools and communities, there was also a really specific academic outcome that came along too. And these kids tended to form learning gaps. Now, the best way I can think to explain a learning gap is literally like this blank screen. It's the absence of information. A kid is expected to know something, and they just don't. And sometimes those gaps are the result of the fact that the kid missed instruction as they were moving. And other times it's the result of the fact that states differ, not only in what they teach, but when and how they teach it. And so my work was really focusing on what resources can we bring to help these highly mobile military students. But an interesting thing happened on the way to graduation, which was, as I'm completely immersed with this student group, I start to see these other student groups who have a lot in common with our military kids. And in fact, our highly mobile military students are actually a part of this broader class of students that we would simply call highly mobile students. And all of the kids that follow into this category move a lot. And they change schools a lot. And in addition to these really problematic social and emotional challenges, they also are at this same increased risk for developing learning gaps. The pattern was the same over and over again. What you see up on your screen is what education is supposed to look like, and what it does look like for a kid who isn't moving and changing schools. I'm going to test you. I'm going to take it away. I'm going to put it back up on the screen. The color of the missing pieces, shout it out if you know it. Yeah, it's yellow. Because if you recognize this pattern and you're following it, you know right away what's missing. But what happens when this student arrives in a classroom? This is what a highly mobile student's education actually looks like. And when you put the two together and compare them, you see in that bottom row things like repetition, a different order, things that look really similar to that top line, but upon closer inspection, you see they're different. And of course, there are pieces missing altogether. So who are these kids? Who are these highly mobile students? Absolutely, it's our military kids. But these are also the children of our agricultural workers and refugees, children who are experiencing homelessness, our foster youth, and children who are living with a relative who isn't their parent. We call that kinship care. As you hear these students groups, they're really diverse, and at times they have really different needs. And yet, that same academic pattern ran throughout all of them. Now, traditionally, education policy is written very narrowly. It often only helps one of these student groups at a time, and usually only in a really specific way. The advantage of that is that we target help. The disadvantage is, inevitably, we leave kids out who desperately need the same assistance. So we began looking at, is there a way we can think about these students differently? Can we recategorize them in a different way? And I began creating recommendations for state departments of education and local school districts that begin with, number one, we've got to know who all those types of highly mobile students are who are in your schools. And once we know that, now we need to understand how these kids are moving or their type of mobility. Are they moving within the same community? Or are they moving between cities? And once we're clear about that, now we can start adopting portfolios of policy that really target those types of mobility. When we do it this way, we end up helping more kids. Now, we know that there are some really negative patterns that come into play if we don't act. Learning gaps are pesky, they are persistent, and they have a tendency to compound if they're not addressed. They can make it difficult for a kid to advance to the next grade, and even for older students to graduate from high school. But there are some positive patterns that take effect if we can get these kids the help they need. Because we know that students who stay in school and have improved outcomes have an increased likelihood of graduating from high school. And students who graduate from high school have an increased likelihood of pursuing higher education or skilled trades. And those happen to be a couple of things that tend to lead to things like increased access to stable employment opportunities. And once we start seeing those increases, it gets really exciting really quickly. Because now we start seeing things like increased access to stable housing and increased consistent access to things like food and healthcare. But we also have another positive pattern at work. Because we know if we help that student, we improve their outcomes into adulthood. But they aren't the only ones who benefit. We actually improve the outcomes of the generations that follow them, and we can have some influence on their peer generations and those who are older than them. We're now helping entire families. And when we help enough families in that way, that's when we start seeing improved outcomes in our neighborhoods, in our communities, our cities, our states, our countries, and yeah, even in the world. That's not a leap. That's the power of education. It starts with helping individuals and literally sets into motion a series of changes that have the power to change the world. I am a gal who loves patterns, and that's a pattern that I can support. There were literally hundreds of people who helped me with this research, and I just want to specifically call out our military families and the former highly mobile students over the years who shared their stories with me. I have an exceptional advisor who I'd like to thank, Dr. Michael Bruner. I have an exceptional cohort 4, the DPP. They're here. And I also would like to thank our exceptional grad college team, from our graduate assistants all the way up through our administration, specifically Alyssa Gardner and Jessica Soria and Dean Crittenden for their help preparing for today. And last but by no means least, there is a very special military family that I would like to thank. That is my family. We call ourselves Team Tidge. It is my spouse and 3 pretty exceptional, highly mobile military students who not only were so supportive, but were a daily reminder of why this work matters. Thank you.